Deep in the dark, isolated hills of north-central Massachusetts lies the decaying village of Dunwich. Outsiders avoid this region, unsettled by its squalor, its silent, furtive inhabitants, and the strange, unnatural symmetry of its rounded hills crowned with ancient stone circles. For centuries, dark legends hung over Dunwich, tales of unhallowed Indian rites, subterranean rumblings, and voices from the earth. But no legend compares to the nightmare that unfolded in the spring of 1913. On the morning of February 2nd, 1913, in a lonely farmhouse hidden among the hills above Dunwich, Lavinia Whatley gave birth to a son. The villagers remembered that night for more than the day. Strange cries echoed across the hills until dawn, while every dog for miles barked without pause as though something unseen had entered the world. Lavinia was an outcast even among the people of Dunwich, an albino woman who had never married, living in squalor with her aged father, Old Watley. For decades, whispers of black magic and forbidden rites had surrounded the family. Yet Lavinia spoke openly of her child, showing no shame or uncertainty about his unknown father. Instead, she seemed proud, muttering strange prophecies about the boy's future and the immense power he would one day possess. Old Watley only deepened the mystery. When questioned about the child's ancestry, he answered with unsettling confidence, hinting that Lavinia's husband was no ordinary man, and declaring that one day the boy would stand atop Sentinel Hill and call his father's name. The child was named Wilbur Watley. From the beginning, nothing about him was natural. He grew at an impossible rate, reaching the size of a 1-year-old within only a few months. Before his first birthday, he walked, spoke with remarkable intelligence, and possessed an eerie self-control unlike any ordinary child. His dark eyes seemed to carry the awareness of an adult, while his coarse features gave him an unsettling, almost goat-like appearance. Soon afterward, the Whateleys began buying cattle in unusual numbers. Yet no matter how many animals disappeared into the decaying barn, the herd never seemed to grow. The surviving cattle appeared sickly and bloodless, marked by strange wounds that no one could explain. As Wilbur grew, he accompanied his mother on secret wanderings through the hills. On Halloween night, villagers saw the child climbing Sentinel Hill beside Lavinia shortly before a great fire blazed among the ancient standing stones. From that day forward, Wilbur was never seen without heavy, tightly buttoned clothing, and any threat of exposing what lay beneath filled him with sudden anger. Neither the people of Dunwich nor their dogs ever accepted the boy. The animals snarled and barked whenever he approached, as if they sensed something hidden beneath his human form. And with each passing month, the whispers surrounding the Whatley family grew darker, for it was becoming impossible to believe that Wilbur Watley was entirely human. While Wilbur's impossible growth continued, Old Watley began preparing the farmhouse for a purpose no one could understand. He purchased cattle year after year, though the herd itself never seemed to increase at the same time.
Them all out.
The old man labored tirelessly to restore long-abandoned sections of the crumbling house. He repaired walls, rebuilt rooms, and boarded every window of the reclaimed upper floor, until no light could enter, and no curious eye could see within. A heavy plank door replaced one of the upstairs windows, and a stout wooden ramp climbed the hillside directly to it. No visitor was ever allowed beyond the locked stairway, Yet strange footsteps and muffled cries were often heard overhead, leaving the few callers who ventured to the farmhouse deeply unsettled. Old Watley also prepared a room for Wilbur, unlike any ordinary child's bedroom. Along tall shelves, he carefully arranged the family's ancient books, repairing their crumbling pages one by one. He often remarked that the boy would learn far more from those volumes than he ever had himself. By the autumn of 1914, Wilbur was only 19 months old, yet he had already grown to the size of a 4-year-old child. He spoke with extraordinary intelligence, wandered the hills beside his mother, and spent long afternoons studying forbidden diagrams while his grandfather instructed him in whispered lessons. When the repairs were finally completed, the abandoned tool shed stood open once again. Those who entered it spoke of a nauseating odor, unlike anything they had ever encountered. A smell some claimed they had noticed only near the ancient stone circles upon the hills. As the months passed, the strange sounds echoing through the countryside grew louder. The hills trembled without explanation. On Halloween, underground rumblings shook Dunwich as flames once again rose from the standing stones atop Sentinel Hill. Wilbur continued to mature at an impossible pace. Before his 4th birthday, he appeared to be nearly 10 years old. He spoke less with each passing season, preferring instead to read in silence or mutter strange words in a language no one recognized. His face grew harsher, more goat-like, and many who looked into his dark eyes believed they saw something profoundly inhuman staring back. Dogs became violently hostile whenever he appeared to travel the lonely roads safely. Wilbur was forced to carry a pistol, and the sound of occasional gunfire only deepened the fear surrounding the Watley family. Visitors to the farmhouse often found Lavinia alone downstairs while heavy footsteps echoed through the sealed upper floor. One peddler joked about opening the locked stairway door, only to fall silent when he heard what sounded unmistakably like a horse moving about overhead. The people of Dunwich remembered the Whateleys' endless cattle purchases, the ancient stories of forbidden sacrifices, and the terrible smell drifting from the house. Few wished to think any further about what might be hidden there. Then came the Great War. Government investigators arrived in Dunwich after discovering alarming signs of physical and social decline. Throughout the region, newspaper reporters soon followed, eager to write of the strange hill country, the infamous Watley family, and the extraordinary boy who, at only 4.5 years old, already possessed the appearance of a 15-year-old youth. Their stories spoke of ancient books, black magic, sealed rooms, mysterious hill noises, and the strange gold coins Old Watley used to purchase his cat. But even the most sensational articles failed to uncover the truth, concealed behind the boarded windows of the Watley farmhouse. The years passed, but nothing about the Whateleys became less disturbing. Every May Eve and Hallowmass, fires burned atop Sentinel Hill, and the mountain answered with deeper rumblings than before. Strange sounds drifted from the sealed upper floor of the farmhouse even when the family was downstairs, while cattle continued to disappear. Some talked of calling outside authorities, but the people of Dunwich had long ago learned that drawing attention to themselves rarely ended well. By 1923, Wilbur was only 10 years old, yet he looked and sounded like a grown man. His beard had thickened, his mind had matured far beyond his years, and his enormous frame continued to grow. That year, Wilbur and his grandfather began another secret reconstruction at the farmhouse. They tore out the upstairs partitions, removed the attic floor, and even demolished the great central chimney. The upper portion of the house became one vast empty chamber stretching from the first floor to the roof. No one could imagine why. The following spring, Old Watley became fascinated by the whippoorwills gathering beneath his bedroom window each night. He calmly told the men at Osborne's store that the birds had come to claim his soul. If they sang until dawn after his death, they had succeeded. If they fell silent, then something had kept them from carrying him away. On Lammas night in 1924, Wilbur summoned Dr. Houghton to the farmhouse. The physician found Old Watley near death, with Lavinia and Wilbur standing beside the bed. Yet it was the house itself that disturbed him most. Above them came a slow, rhythmic surging like waves breaking upon a distant shore. Outside, thousands of whippoorwills cried in perfect time with the old man's labored breathing. Near 1 o'clock, Old Watley briefly regained consciousness. With his final strength, he warned Wilbur that more space would soon be needed. Wilbur was still growing, but something else was growing even faster. He instructed his grandson to open the gate for Yog-Sothoth using an ancient ritual, then warned him to keep the unseen creature well fed. If it escaped before the proper time, everything would be lost. The doctor dismissed the words as the ravings of a dying man. An hour later, Old Watley breathed his last. The endless chorus of whippoorwills suddenly faded into silence. Lavinia wept. Wilbur only smiled. They didn't get him, he muttered. After his grandfather's death, Wilbur became even more feared. His knowledge of forbidden books grew astonishing, and librarians across the world quietly exchanged letters with the brilliant but unsettling young scholar. In Dunwich, however, suspicion followed him wherever he went.
Where are you?
Young people occasionally disappeared, yet no one dared accuse him openly. His purchases of cattle increased, and so did his unnatural height. By 1925, even a visiting scholar from Miskatonic University left the Watley farm pale and deeply disturbed. Wilbur already stood nearly 7 feet tall. His treatment of Lavinia grew steadily crueler. He forbade her from joining him during the ceremonies on Sentinel Hill. And in 1926, she confessed to a neighbor that she had become afraid of her own son. That Halloween, the fires burned once again upon Sentinel Hill, while enormous flocks of whippoorwills gathered around the Watley farm. Shortly after midnight, their cries erupted into wild, almost mocking laughter that echoed across the countryside until dawn. When morning came, the birds were gone.
What is that?
So was Lavinia Watley.
Look at him! Keep
She
away
was
from
never
it!
seen again. The following summer, Wilbur moved into one of the farm sheds while yet another reconstruction began inside the farmhouse. This time he sealed the doors and windows of the ground floor and stripped away its interior walls, just as he had done upstairs years before. Neighbors who caught sight of him noticed something new. For the first time, Wilbur Watley seemed worried. He now stood more than 7 feet tall, and neither he nor whatever remained hidden inside the house had finished growing. The following winter, Wilbur Watley left Dunwich. For months he had written to libraries across the world seeking a book none would lend him, but one copy lay nearby, at Miskatonic University in Arkham, so Wilbur entered a city for the first time. He was nearly 8 feet tall now, shabby, bearded, and carrying a cheap new valise. People stared as he passed, but Wilbur noticed nothing except his destination, the university library, and the book kept locked within it, the Necronomicon. There he again met Dr. Henry Armitage, who had visited the Watley farm years earlier. Wilbur carried his grandfather's battered copy of Dr. John Dee's English translation, but several pages were missing. He asked to examine the university's complete Latin edition. Armitage reluctantly agreed. For hours, Wilbur compared the two texts, searching for a missing passage. When questioned, he admitted that he sought an incantation concerning Yog-Sothoth. As Wilbur copied from the ancient volume, Armitage looked over his shoulder and began to read. The book described beings older than mankind, existing not within the spaces known to humanity, but between them, unseen, waiting. Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the key and guardian of the gate. Past, present, future, all are one in Yog-Sothoth. It claimed these beings had walked the earth before mankind, and that they still walked it invisible to human eyes. Sometimes their presence could be known only by their smell. The passage ended with a warning. Man rules now where they ruled once. They shall soon rule where man rules now. They wait patient and potent, for here shall they reign again. Armitage looked from the book to Wilbur. Suddenly the stories from Dunwich no longer seemed like superstition. Something had happened among those hills, something connected to the enormous creatures sitting before him. Wilbur finally closed his notebook. "Mr. Armitage," he said, "I calculate I've got to take that book home." Armitage refused. Wilbur explained that there were things in the book he needed to attempt under conditions impossible to reproduce in Arkham. Again, Armitage refused. Wilbur's expression hardened. Then he smiled. "Well, all right, if you feel that way about it. Maybe Harvard won't be so fussy as you be." He rose and left, stooping beneath every doorway. Outside, a great watchdog erupted into savage barking as Wilbur crossed the campus. Armitage watched him from the window. Then he noticed the smell, the same foul, unidentifiable odor he remembered from the Whateleys farmhouse. A sentence from the Necronomicon returned to him. "As a foulness shall ye know them." Armitage reconsidered everything he knew about Wilbur Whateley. His strange birth, his unnatural growth, the fires upon Sentinel Hill, the noises beneath the earth, and the disappearance of his mother. The villagers blamed generations of inbreeding. Armitage no longer believed it. Wilbur's mother was human, but what had his father been?
Over them all.
Wilbur had been born on Candlemas of 1913, 9 months earlier. On May Eve, strange noises had thundered from the hills loudly enough to be heard miles away. What had walked upon those mountains that night, and what had entered the world afterward in something resembling human flesh? Armitage decided to find out. He contacted the physician who had attended Old Watley during his final illness, and learned of the old man's final warning. He returned to Dunwich and questioned the villagers. Most importantly, he returned to the Necronomicon. This time Armitage carefully studied the passages Wilbur had been so desperate to understand. He corresponded with scholars of ancient folklore. He compared legends, rituals, dates, and astronomical cycles. Slowly, the fragments began fitting together. Curiosity became suspicion. Suspicion became alarm, and alarm became fear. By summer, Henry Armitage had reached a conclusion he could no longer dismiss. Something was waiting in the hills beyond Dunwich. Something connected to Wilbur Watley. Something that did not belong to the world mankind knew. And if Armitage understood the ancient book correctly, Wilbur was trying to open the gate. The Dunwich Horror itself began between Lammas in the autumn equinox of 1928, and Dr. Armitage was among those who witnessed its monstrous prologue. He had learned of Wilbur Watley's desperate journey to Cambridge, where he tried to borrow the Necronomicon from Harvard's Widener Library. When refused, Wilbur attempted to gain permission to copy the passages he needed. But Armitage had already warned every library known to possess the forbidden volume. Under no circumstances was Wilbur Watley to be given access to it. Those who saw him in Cambridge remembered his extraordinary nervousness. He seemed frantic to obtain the book, yet equally frantic to return to Dunwich. as though whatever he had left behind could not safely remain unattended. Then, in the early hours of August 3rd, Dr. Armitage awoke to the savage barking of the watchdog on the Miskatonic campus. The animal's snarls rose steadily in violence. Then came another sound, a scream. It awakened half of Arkham, and those who heard it would remember it for the rest of their lives. No human throat could have produced such a sound. Armitage dressed hurriedly and ran toward the university library. A burglar alarm shrilled through the building. Armitage ordered the gathering crowd back, taking only Professor Warren Rice and Dr. Francis Morgan. He entered the building. As the three men crossed the darkened library, whippoorwills began calling from the surrounding trees. Their cries fell into an unnatural rhythm with the weakening breaths of something inside. A terrible odor filled the building. They followed it to the genealogical reading room. For several seconds, none of them dared turn on the light. Then Armitage reached for the switch. Among overturned chairs and scattered tables lay Wilbur Watley. The watchdog had found him after he entered through the window. Wilbur was nearly 9 feet tall. His clothing had been torn away, revealing what his long coats had concealed for years. Only the hands and head were unmistakably human. The great black eyes, coarse features, and goatish, chinless face still bore the stamp of the Whatley family. Everything below belonged to something else. His massive legs resembled those of some prehistoric reptile more than those of a man. There was no blood, only a foul greenish-yellow fluid spreading across the floor. Near the window lay an empty canvas sack. Beside a desk was Wilbur's revolver, unfired. His purpose was obvious. Wilbur Watley had come to steal the Necronomicon. The presence of the three men seemed to rouse him. Without lifting his head, Wilbur began to speak. At first, the words belonged to no language Armitage recognized. Then fragments became familiar. They were passages from the very book Wilbur had died trying to obtain. Guy and Yog-Sothoth. Outside, the whippoorwill screamed faster. Wilbur's breathing slowed. The dog raised its head and howled. Then the great black eyes collapsed inward. Silence. The whippoorwill stopped. Then the night exploded with wings. The birds rose against the moon and scattered into the darkness, fleeing from whatever they had expected to claim. The watchdog barked in terror and leapt through the open window. Armitage ordered the curtains drawn. No one else was to see what lay inside. It was fortunate that he did. Wilbur Watley had already begun to disappear. His enormous body softened and collapsed. The strange tissues shrank, dissolved, and lost their form with astonishing speed. By the time the medical examiner arrived, almost nothing remained. There were no bones, no recognizable skeleton, only a pale, sticky residue upon the floor. Whatever human inheritance Wilbur Watley possessed had been very small, and one conclusion could no longer be avoided. Old Watley had told the truth. Wilbur had taken after his father. But all that had happened before was only the prologue to the true Dunwich horror. After Wilbur Watley's death, officials traveled to Dunwich to settle his property and search for possible heirs. They found the countryside already uneasy. The rumblings beneath the hills were growing stronger, and from the boarded Watley farmhouse came a foul stench and strange surging sounds. Among Wilbur's possessions was an enormous handwritten ledger filled with unknown characters, apparently a diary. It was sent with a strange collection of books to Miskatonic University for translation. On the night of September 9th, the horror broke loose. The hills rumbled throughout the evening. Dogs barked frantically until morning. Shortly after sunrise, Luther Brown was driving cattle toward 10-acre meadow when he discovered something impossible. bushes and young trees had been crushed aside, leaving a path wide enough for a house. In the road were enormous round impressions, nearly the size of barrelheads. There were far too many to belong to any ordinary animal. Soon telephone calls were passing from house to house. Then came worse news. The Watley farmhouse had been torn apart from within. Timbers lay scattered across the ground. The remaining floor was coated with a foul, tar-like substance, and enormous tracks led away through the fields. A path wider than a barn had been crushed through the vegetation. Stone walls had simply been knocked aside. Nearby, half of Seth Bishop's cattle were missing. Many of those remaining had been drained almost completely of blood. By noon, the men of Dunwich had gathered to follow its trail. The tracks crossed roads and meadows before descending into Cold Spring Glen. Trees had been bent and broken. The undergrowth had been gouged away. It looked as though a building had somehow slid down the ravine. That night, Dunwich barricaded itself. Cattle were driven into barns, doors were reinforced, guns were loaded. Shortly after 2 a.m, the dogs at Elmer Fry's farm began barking wildly. Then came the smell. The family heard a heavy swishing sound. Somewhere outside. Suddenly, the barn began to splinter. The cattle screamed as something enormous forced its way inside. Elmer Fry lit a lantern, but he knew better than to open the door. The family remained together in silence while the destruction continued outside. Eventually, screaming stopped. Then came snapping timber, crashing boards, and the sound of something immense moving away toward Cold Spring Glen. Morning revealed 2 enormous paths of destruction between the glen and the Fry farm. One side of the barn had collapsed. Most of the cattle were gone. Dunwich descended into panic. But the following night passed quietly, and some began to hope that whatever had escaped had disappeared. It had not. Fresh tracks appeared beneath Sentinel Hill, a 30-foot wide trail of crushed vegetation climbed directly toward the summit. Even sheer cliffs had not stopped it. At the top stood the ancient stone where Old Watley and Wilbur had performed their strange rites. The earth surrounding it had been violently thrashed, and upon the stone lay the same foul substance found inside the ruined farmhouse. Whatever the creature was, it had deliberately returned to the place where the Whateleys had worshipped. Then came Thursday night. The whippoorwills screamed relentlessly from Cold Spring Glen. At 3 a.m, every telephone on the party line began to ring. Those who answered heard a terrified voice. "Help! Oh my God!" Then came a tremendous crash. The line went silent. No one went outside.
Amos?
At dawn, neighbors began calling one another. Every household answered, except the Frys. An armed group finally approached the farm. The enormous tracks had returned. But the Fry house was gone. It had collapsed inward like an eggshell. There were no survivors. There were no bodies. Only wreckage, the unbearable stench, and the same black, tarry residue. The Elmer Fry family had simply been erased from Dunwich. While Dunwich struggled to understand what had happened at the Fry farm, another part of the horror was unfolding quietly in Arkham. Wilbur Watley had left behind a diary. The manuscript had been sent to Miskatonic University, but no expert could read it. Its strange alphabet resembled ancient Arabic, yet belonged to no language anyone could identify. Eventually, the scholars concluded that the symbols formed an artificial alphabet. The diary was written in cipher. It was placed in the hands of Dr. Henry Armitage. Armitage suspected the alphabet had descended from some forgotten occult tradition, but its origin mattered less than the language concealed beneath it. He believed Wilbur had written in English. Throughout late August, Armitage immersed himself in cryptography. Night after night, he studied centuries-old systems of secret writing, comparing them against Wilbur's manuscript. Gradually, he recognized the structure. The cipher used multiple shifting alphabets controlled by hidden keywords, an ancient and extraordinarily difficult method. As September approached, individual letters began to emerge. Words followed. The diary was indeed written in English. On the evening of September 2nd, the final barrier gave way. For the first time, Armitage began to read the private thoughts of Wilbur Watley. One of the earliest passages was dated November 26, 1916. Wilbur had been only 3.5 years old. He wrote a forbidden formulae taught by his grandfather, strange visions of distant places, and beings that communicated with him from beyond the earth.
Open your mind to the ancient
Then Armitage
script.
reached the passages concerning the creature upstairs in the Watley farmhouse, Wilbur's twin. Wilbur wrote that his brother possessed little of what he called an earth brain, normally invisible. The creature could be seen only through certain occult signs and powders, and it was growing faster than Wilbur himself. But the most terrible passages revealed why the creature existed. Wilbur wrote of beings from outside our world that could not fully enter our existence without human blood.
I understand.
The Watley
I will
family
be
had
ready.
provided that connection. Wilbur and his brother had been created to open the way. Once that way was opened, humanity would be exterminated, animals and plants would follow. Eventually, the earth itself would be transformed and drawn away from the universe of ordinary matter. Armitage kept reading. He read through the entire night. By morning, he was drenched in cold sweat, turning pages with trembling hands. He telephoned his wife and told her he would not be coming home. Food was brought to him. He barely touched it. For 2 more days, he continued deciphering the manuscript, sleeping only briefly in his chair. Professor Rice and Dr. Morgan were summoned to the library. When they learned what Armitage had discovered, both men left pale and trembling. His physician ordered him to stop working. Armitage refused. He had to finish the diary. At twilight the following evening, he finally reached the end.
God's name can we
Exhausted and nearly delirious, Armitage could repeat only one question. What,
do? What
in God's name, can we do? His sleep brought little relief. He raved about the boarded-up Watley farmhouse and beings from another dimension.
No, not that.
He called for the Necronomicon and other forbidden
The
books,
farmhouse.
searching for some formula
Stop
capable
them.
of stopping what the
Horrible.
Whateleys had begun. And through his delirium came one terrifying realization.
Necronomicon, the formula.
Wilbur
It
was
must be
gone,
stopped.
but his brother was still alive. Worse, the creature had not been fed since Wilbur's death. By Friday, Armitage's mind had cleared, the fear remained. So did the responsibility. The next day he summoned Rice and
This
Morgan.
passage
The
correlates
3
with
men
the
worked
9th
for
verse.
hours among
We
books
must
few
find the
scholars
formula.
even knew existed. There was no skepticism among them now. All 3 had seen Wilbur Watley's body. They debated calling the Massachusetts State Police, but decided against it. No one who had not witnessed the
Text
impossible
clearly
would
said that the
believe
ritual
them.
must be completed by
Instead,
sunrise, but we
they
lacked the
searched for
essential
another
elements
solution.
described in the
Ancient books were brought from locked shelves, formulae were copied, chemicals were obtained from the university laboratory. Armitage began preparing a strange powder that might reveal what human eyes could not normally see. Yet he doubted whether any ordinary weapon could harm the thing Wilbur had left behind. By Tuesday, they finally had the beginnings of a plan. Armitage intended to travel to Dunwich within the week. He was already too late. On Wednesday, he opened the Arkham Advertiser. Buried inside was a small Associated Press story, treating the strange reports from Dunwich as a joke. Something enormous had apparently been loose in the countryside. The newspaper blamed bootleg whiskey. Armitage knew better. The thing in the farmhouse had escaped. He immediately telephoned Rice and Morgan. The 3 men began preparing for Dunwich, and for whatever Wilbur's brother had become. Friday morning, Henry Armitage, Warren Rice, and Francis Morgan left Arkham for Dunwich, arriving shortly after 1. At Osborne's store, they learned what had happened. The Elmer Fry farm had been destroyed. The family was gone. That afternoon, the 3 men examined the ruins, the tarry residue, the enormous tracks, Seth Bishop's wounded cattle, and great swaths of vegetation crushed beneath something of tremendous size. On Sentinel Hill, the trail climbed directly towards the ancient stone altar at the summit. 5 state police officers had arrived that morning to investigate. Now they too were missing. Their automobiles stood abandoned beside the Fry ruins. Old Sam Hutchins turned pale. He had warned them not to enter. Night was approaching. Armitage checked the formula he had memorized. Rice carried a metal sprayer containing the powder prepared in Arkham. Morgan carried a big game rifle, despite Armitage's warning that ordinary weapons would probably be useless. As darkness fell, the villagers barricaded themselves indoors while the 3 men kept watch near the glen. The hills rumbled through the night, whippoorwills cried from the darkness, and occasionally the wind carried the same unbearable stench they had encountered beside Wilbur Watley in the Miskatonic University library. But nothing emerged. Whatever waited in Cold Spring Glen was biding its time, and Armitage refused to pursue it in darkness. Morning brought rain, thunder, and lightning over the hills. Then more than a dozen terrified men came running down the road. The creature was moving again, and this time, it was moving in daylight. A hired boy near the Corey farm had seen trees bending at the mouth of Cold Spring Glen. He heard a wet, swishing sound and enormous footsteps splashing through the mud. But he saw nothing. At Bishop's Brook, a bridge groaned beneath an invisible weight behind it. The rain briefly revealed tracks as large as barrels. Then another call had come from the Seth Bishop farm. The housekeeper reported trees bending along the road. The dogs began barking and whining. A shed suddenly collapsed. The front fence was crushed. Then something enormous began striking the house, again and again. Everyone listening on the party line heard the screaming. Then came a tremendous crash. Armitage knew there could be no more waiting. They had to follow it. He told the frightened men that the creature was invisible, but Rice's powder might reveal it. The formula Armitage had learned from Wilbur's books might destroy it. There were no guarantees, but if they did nothing, the devastation would continue. The men crossed fields and streams toward the Bishop farm as the storm began to weaken. They found the house and barn collapsed. There were no bodies, no survivors. Only the familiar stench, tarry residue, and enormous tracks leading away toward the ruined Watley farmhouse, toward Sentinel Hill. The group followed at the foot of the hill. The tracks left the road grass, and brush had been flattened in a broad path climbing toward the summit. Armitage raised a telescope and studied the hillside, then handed it to Morgan. Morgan stared through the glass, and suddenly cried out. Far above them, patches of grass and bushes were moving. Nothing could be seen between them, but something enormous was climbing the hill, slowly, deliberately, toward the ancient stone altar. For days, Dunwich had fled from an invisible horror. Now they had found it. In the end, only the 3 men from Arkham continued up Sentinel Hill. Dr. Armitage, Professor Rice, and Dr. Morgan left the frightened townspeople with the telescope and began the difficult climb. From the road below, Dunwich watched. Far above, the great swath of crushed vegetation continued toward the summit. The invisible thing was still climbing, but the men were gaining. Then the Arkham party turned from the trail and made for a smaller ridge overlooking the creature's path. They reached it just after the unseen horror passed below. Professor Rice raised the sprayer. The powder had been prepared to make the invisible visible. Rice released it. For one instant, a vast gray cloud spread across the mountainside, and within it, something appeared. Curtis Watley screamed and dropped the telescope. When Henry Wheeler recovered the telescope and looked again, the creature had vanished. Only 3 tiny figures remained, running toward the summit. Then another sound rose from the valley, whippoorwills, hundreds of them. Their cries spread across Sentinel Hill in a feverish rhythm, as though they too were waiting. At the summit, the 3 men stopped near the ancient altar stone. Armitage raised his arms. The daylight changed. The sun seemed to dim. A deep rumbling came from beneath the hills. Another answered from the sky. Lightning flashed overhead. Still the 3 men chanted. Dogs began barking from distant farms. The sky deepened into an unnatural purple. Another flash illuminated the summit. Mist seemed to gather around the altar stone. Then something answered. A voice rolled down from Sentinel Hill. No human throat could have produced it. The sound was deeper than thunder, a hideous croaking that seemed to vibrate inside the body. Yet it was unmistakably trying to form words. The voice faltered. Through the telescope, Wheeler saw the 3 men moving their arms furiously as the incantation approached its end. Then the thing spoke again. Its cries became desperate, and suddenly, horrifyingly intelligible.
Help! Help! Help!
The people below froze. Then came another cry.
Father! Father! Yog-Sothoth!
Signa stellarum creamus.
Those were the last words of the Dunwich Horror. A tremendous explosion tore across the hills. A bolt of lightning plunged from the purple sky into the altar stone. Then an invisible wave swept down the mountain. Trees bent violently. Grass flattened. The crowd staggered beneath a blast of indescribable stench. Dogs howled across the countryside. Vegetation withered to a sickly yellow-gray. Countless whippoorwills fell across the fields and woods. Then it was over. The darkness lifted, the rumbling ceased, sunlight returned to Sentinel Hill. Later, Armitage, Rice, and Morgan came slowly down the mountain. They had succeeded, but none looked triumphant.
Only a fraction of it was physical matter.
Armitage explained that the thing was gone forever.
The creature was
Only a
part of
fraction
another
had ever been
material.
matter in the
creature
ordinary
is
sense.
gone. It has been sent back.
Most of it belonged somewhere else,
The creature was
beyond
part
the
of another
material universe.
That creature is gone.
Now it had returned there. Curtis Watley regained consciousness. With memory came terror. At last he described what had broken him. The face.
Horrible face!
Atop that enormous mass had been something almost human.
The hair was
Red eyes, crinkled albino hair, the unmistakable features of the Whateleys. Then old Zebulon Watley remembered something.
Old Watley said it 15 years ago. He said Lavinia's child would call his father's name from the top of Sentinel Hill.
The creature was governed
The
by
townspeople
laws
asked
not belonging
Armitage
to our
what the
space.
creature had been.
Something of
It was
that same
something
nature
governed by
existed in
laws that
Wilbur
did not
Whateley.
belong to our part of space.
Wilbur had
There had been
more
something of
human.
that same nature in Wilbur,
Wilbur's brother.
but Wilbur had been more human.
His brother
His
inherited
brother had
more from
inherited
outside.
far more from the other side. The Whateleys had intended to open the way for beings from outside. Beings that would erase humanity and transform the earth for purposes no human mind could understand. But one question remained. How had Wilbur summoned it? Armitage corrected them. Wilbur had not summoned the creature. It had been there from the beginning. It was Lavinia, Whatley's other child, Wilbur's twin brother. And of the two, it looked far more like their father.